The great space station called Vethkarai floated in the darkness between stars like a massive metal flower with 1,000 petals stretching outward into the void. Inside this station, more than 200 different alien species had gathered for a meeting that happened only once every 3,000 cycles. They came from worlds of ice and fire, from planets where the air was poison and moons where gravity could crush bones. They were the masters of the galaxy, the rulers of empires that spanned countless star systems, and today they had come together to witness something that most of them found very amusing. Earth had sent a delegation to ask for membership in the Galactic Conclave. Ambassador Rilith of the Valorian Dominion was the first to speak. He was a creature that looked like a giant snake with scales that shimmered between purple and gold. His body coiled around his speaking platform as he looked down at the small group of humans standing in the center of the massive chamber. "Is this a joke?" he asked, and his voice carried the sharp sound of laughter mixed with disgust. "They send these soft little creatures to stand before us. A species that has not even built a permanent colony on their own moon?" The chamber filled with sounds of agreement. The Trekkie, who looked like insects the size of horses, clicked their mandibles together in a pattern that meant amusement. The Orthians, beings made of swirling gas who lived in the clouds of giant planets, pulsed with lights that showed their contempt. Even the archivists of Kelos Prime, creatures of pure crystal who normally stayed neutral in all matters, made notes about humanity's obvious inadequacy in their official records. Tiara Elena Vasquez stood at the center podium and tried to keep her face calm. She was a tall woman with dark hair pulled back in a tight bun, and she wore the formal blue uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps. She had spent 20 years preparing for this moment. She had studied every known alien species, learned 6 different galactic languages, and practiced her speech until she could say it in her sleep. But she had not prepared for this level of mockery. "Your world is weak," declared High Speaker Morvath of the Ascendancy. He was a being made entirely of living crystal, and his body bent light in strange ways that made him hard to look at directly. Humans have no natural defenses worth mentioning. No poisoning your bite. No armor on your skin. No ability to read minds or project energy. You are nothing more than prey animals who figured out how to make sharp sticks. That is all you will ever be. The laughter that followed his words was loud and cruel. Tiara Vasquez gripped the edges of the podium until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to shout at them. She wanted to tell them that humans had walked on their moon, split the atom, built machines that could think, and mapped the very code of life itself. But she knew that none of this would impress beings who had done all these things millions of years ago. Then Executor Vren of the Nalthian Coalition rose to speak, and the chamber grew quiet. Vren was terrifying to behold. She stood on 6 powerful legs, each one ending in claws that could tear through metal. Her body was covered in thick armor plates, the color of dried blood, and her face had no eyes, only a cluster of sensory organs that could detect heat, movement, and fear. The Nalthians were known as the greatest warriors in the galaxy, and Vren was their deadliest commander. She activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. A tiny dot of light blinked on the outer edge of one spiral arm. "This is Earth," Vren said, and her voice sounded like stones grinding together. "It sits alone in a region of space that no major power has ever bothered to claim. Do you know why?" She paused to let the question hang in the air. "Because there is nothing they're worth taking. Earth exists only because nothing worth conquering lives on its surface. You are not a threat. You are not even a curiosity. You are simply beneath our notice, like insects crawling in the dirt while giants walk overhead." The laughter that followed was the worst yet. It came from every direction, from every species, a wave of mockery that crashed against the small human delegation like a physical force. Tia Vasquez looked at her team. There were 5 of them in total, and she could see the anger and hurt on their faces. Commander Jackson, their security officer, had his jaw clenched so tight that a vein throbbed in his temple. Darayuki Tanaka, their xenobiologist, was blinking back tears. Even Marcus Wright, their youngest team member and the mission's technical specialist, had lost his usual confident smile. But Dr. Vasquez had a secret. Her datapad buzzed against her hip, and she glanced down at the message that had just arrived from Earth's First Contact Research Division. The words glowed on the small screen. Project Companion confirmed. The child is on the transport. Arrival at station in 6 hours. Vasquez felt a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. She looked up at the assembled aliens, at their mocking faces and contemptuous gestures, and she felt something that surprised her. She felt sorry for them. They had no idea what was coming. They had looked at humanity and seen only weakness, only softness, only the lack of claws and fangs and armor. They made the same mistake that every predator species in history had made when they first encountered humans. They had confused kindness for weakness. They had mistaken gentleness for helplessness. They had looked at a species that chose not to grow natural weapons and assumed that this meant humans were defenseless. They were about to learn how wrong they were. "Thank you for your honest assessment of our species," Dr. Vasquez said, and her voice was calm and pleasant. "I hope you will all still be here in 6 hours. Earth has prepared a small demonstration that we believe will change your perspective on humanity." Ambassador Rillith made a snorting sound. "A demonstration? What will you show us? Your primitive rockets? Your chemical weapons? Your pathetic little space probes?" "Nothing like that," Dr. Vasquez replied. "We are going to introduce you to a child and his pet." The aliens exchanged confused glances. A child? A pet? What kind of demonstration was this? But Dr. Vasquez simply smiled and said nothing more. She could wait. Humans were very good at waiting. It was one of the things that made them so dangerous. And in exactly 6 hours, the entire galaxy was going to learn just how dangerous patience could be. To understand what happened next, you must first understand the Varax. In all the known galaxy, across thousands of explored star systems and millions of cataloged worlds, no creature inspired more fear than the Varax. They were the monsters that haunted the nightmares of species who had themselves conquered entire sectors of space. They were the darkness that made warriors tremble and emperors flee. They were death-given form, and they had never been defeated. The Varax evolved on a world called Vorath Prime, a planet so deadly that scientists classified it as a super death world, because the normal classification of death world was not strong enough. The surface of Vorath Prime was covered in volcanic glass that could slice through most materials, like a hot knife through butter. The air was thick with acid that could dissolve metal in minutes. The oceans were boiling pools of toxic chemicals, and the land was home to thousands of species that existed only to kill and consume. And the Varax were the apex predators of this nightmare world. They stood 8 feet tall on average, though some specimens have been recorded at over 10 feet. Their bodies were covered in chitin the color of obsidian, a natural armor that could stop most projectile weapons. They had 6 eyes arranged in a pattern that allowed them to see in almost every direction at once, and these eyes could detect the light spectrums that most species could not even imagine. Their claws were curved blades of organic material, harder than steel, capable of shearing through starship hull plating with minimal effort. But the physical attributes of the Varax were not what made them truly terrifying. What made them nightmares was their intelligence. The Varax did not simply hunt their prey. They studied it. They learned its patterns, its fears, its weaknesses. They would stalk a single target across multiple star systems, watching from the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. They played with their food in ways that seemed almost artistic in their cruelty. There were records of Varax hunters who had followed a single prey species for years, slowly picking off members of a colony one by one, always leaving just enough survivors to spread fear. They seemed to feed on terror as much as flesh, growing stronger from the psychological damage they inflicted. No Varax had ever been captured alive. The few specimens that scientists had managed to study were already dead, and even those corpses seemed to radiate menace. No Varax had ever been tamed or trained or even successfully communicated with. They did not make deals or treaties. They did not negotiate or surrender. They existed only to hunt, and everything else in the galaxy was prey. Every spacefaring civilization had stories about the Varax. The Valorian Dominion had sacrificed 3 entire colony worlds just to create a buffer zone between their territory and Varax hunting grounds. The Trekkie had developed an entire branch of their religion devoted to praying for protection from the shadow hunters. The Eworthians, despite living in the clouds of gas giants where the Varax could not reach them, still told stories to their young about the monsters who walked on solid ground. And the Nalthian coalition, whose warriors were feared across a dozen sectors, had a standing order that no soldier was ever to engage a Varax in combat. Not because they would definitely lose, but because the survival rate was so low that it was considered wasteful to even try. When a Varax was sighted in a star system, civilizations did not fight. They ran. They packed up their colonies, abandoned their stations, and fled to safer regions of space. It was simply accepted that wherever the Varax went, death followed. So when the proximity alarms on Veth-Karai suddenly began screaming, and the long-range sensors detected a Varax biosignature approaching the station, the entire conclave erupted into immediate and total panic. "Seal the chamber," screamed Ambassador Rillith, his serpentine body coiling into a defensive posture. "Activate all defense grids," roared Executor Vryn, her sensory organs pulsing with agitation. "How did it get past the perimeter patrols?" demanded High Speaker Morvith, his crystalline form flickering with colors that indicated extreme distress. Alarms blared throughout the station. Emergency lights flashed red and orange. Security teams scrambled to defensive positions, though everyone knew that their weapons would be nearly useless against a Varax. Delegates from dozens of species tried to flee the chamber, only to find that the doors had automatically sealed as part of the lockdown protocols. The Trekkie were clicking so fast that their mandibles were a blur. The Eworthians had compressed themselves into tight spheres of swirling gas. Their bioluminescence dimmed to almost nothing in an instinctive attempt to hide. Even the normally emotionless arcanists of Kilos Prime had stopped recording and were backing away from the chamber's entrance. Dara Vasquez watched the chaos with a calm expression on her face. She checked her datapad again and nodded slightly at the message displayed there. "Arrival confirmed. Docking at Bay 7. Package is secure." Around her, the most powerful beings in the galaxy were losing their minds with fear. These were creatures who had conquered star systems, who commanded fleets of warships, who had lived for thousands of years and seen wonders beyond human imagination. And they were terrified of what was coming through those doors. "Everyone," Dr. Vasquez said, and somehow her quiet voice cut through the screaming alarms and panicked shouts. "I believe our guest has arrived. If you would all please remain calm, I think you will find this demonstration very educational." Ambassador Rillith turned his many eyes toward her. "Are you insane?" he hissed. "There's a Varax on this station. Do you not understand what that means? We are all going to die." Dr. Vasquez smiled. "I do not think so, Ambassador. In fact, I believe you are about to witness something the that will change everything you think you know about the universe. The doors to the chamber began to open. Every weapon in the room trained on the entrance. Every eye, every sensor, every detection system focused on the corridor beyond. Delegates who had mocked humanity just hours ago were now frozen in place, their bodies rigid with primal terror. The corridor was dark. Shadows filled the space beyond the doorway. And somewhere in those shadows, something was moving. Something was coming. And Dr. Vasquez, alone among all the beings in that chamber, was not afraid. She knew exactly what was walking through that corridor. She knew exactly what the galaxy was about to see. And she knew that after today, no one would ever mock Earth again. The shadow shifted. Footsteps echoed in the corridor. And then, into the light of the conclave chamber, walked the most unexpected sight any of them had ever witnessed. A human child walked through the doors of the conclave chamber. He was a small boy, perhaps 10 years old by Earth standards. He had brown hair that stuck up in several directions, as if he had forgotten to comb it that morning. Freckles dotted. His nose and cheeks like tiny spots of cinnamon. He wore simple clothes. Just a red t-shirt with some kind of cartoon character on it, cargo shorts with many pockets, and sneakers that looked like they had seen many adventures. His name was Marcus Chun, and he came from a small town in a place called Montana on the planet Earth. He walked into the chamber with the easy confidence of a child who did not yet know that the universe could be cruel. He looked around at the massive space with wide eyes full of wonder, taking in the hundreds of alien beings, the flashing lights, the towering architecture. "Wow," he said softly. "This place is so cool." But no one was looking at the boy. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on what he carried in his arms. Cradled against his chest like a sleeping cat was a Varax cub. The creature was young, perhaps 6 months old by its species' growth cycle, but it was already the size of a large dog. Its chitin was the color of polished obsidian, gleaming under the chamber's lights like dark armor. Its 6 eyes were half closed in an expression of pure contentment. Its claws, even retracted, were visible as curved blades pressing gently against the boy's arm. Its tail, tipped with what looked like a natural blade, hung down and swayed slightly with each step the boy took. And it was purring. The sound was low and rumbling, like distant thunder, but there was no mistaking what it was. The Varax cub was purring with happiness, its body relaxed completely in the arms of a human child. The silence in the chamber was absolute. No one moved, no one spoke, no one even seemed to breathe. Ambassador Rilla's serpentine body had frozen mid-coil, his many eyes so wide that they seemed ready to pop out of his skull. Eye Speaker Morvath's crystalline form had stopped flickering entirely, locked in a pattern of pure white that indicated total shock. The Trekkie had stopped clicking. The Awarthians had stopped pulsing. Executor Vryn, the fearsome warrior who had mocked humanity's weakness just hours before, took an involuntary step backward. Her 6 legs moved without her conscious control, driven by instincts that had been written into her species' genetic code over millions of years of evolution. The Nalthians had fought the Varax many times across their history, and every one of those fights had ended in bloodshed and death. Her body remembered that terror, even if her mind did not. And yet, here was a human child, a small soft creature with no claws or armor or weapons, casually carrying a Varax in his arms like it was a stuffed toy. "Hi, everyone," Marcus said cheerfully, waving with one hand while the other supported the cub. "My name is Marcus, and this is Shadow. Mom said I should bring her to show you all because you wanted to see what humans can do." He scratched behind the cub's triangular ear, and Shadow made a sound that could only be described as a chirp of pleasure. The deadliest predator in the known galaxy chirped like a happy bird because a human child was petting it. She is really friendly once you get to know her. Marcus continued, completely oblivious to the shocked silence around him. When we first found her, she was really scared. Her mom had gone away and not come back, and Shadow was all alone. She would hiss and swipe at anyone who came near her. But I just sat with her every day. I would bring her food and read books out loud and tell her about my day. I did not try to touch her or anything. I just let her get used to me. He smiled down at the cub in his arms. And then one day, she came to me. She just walked right over and put her head in my lap. I was so happy. I cried a little bit, but do not tell anyone, okay? Shadow opened her 6 eyes and looked up at the boy. Then she yawned, revealing rows of teeth that were designed to tear through flesh and bone, and nuzzled deeper into his arms. Now she sleeps on my bed every night, Marcus said. Mom says she sheds too much, but I do not mind. I just vacuum more often. And she's really good at keeping my little sister out of my room. Sarah used to steal my toys all the time. But now she is too scared to come in. Shadow would never hurt her, though. Shadow is a good girl. He looked around the chamber again, his young face full of innocent curiosity. Why is everyone so quiet? He asked. Did I do something wrong? Doctor. Vasquez stepped forward and put a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder. No. Marcus, you did everything exactly right. Our friends here are just very surprised. They have never seen anyone become friends with a Varax before. Really? Marcus looked confused. But Shadow is so nice. She just wanted someone to love her. All animals want that. My grandpa always says that there is no such thing as a mean animal. Just scared ones. You just have to be patient and kind, and eventually they will trust you. He held Shadow up slightly, offering her toward the assembled delegates. Does anyone want to pet her? She really likes it when you scratch behind her. Ears, and under her chin too, but be careful of her claws. She does not mean to scratch, but sometimes she gets excited and forgets to retract them. Not a single being in the chamber moved. Marcus shrugged. Okay, maybe later. Shadow gets shy around strangers anyway. Do not worry, girl, he whispered to the cub. They will warm up. To you, just like I did. The Varax cub made another contented chirping sound and closed her eyes again. Nebula'sEdge looked out at the conclave, at the frozen faces and trembling bodies, at the warriors who had conquered star systems now paralyzed with a mixture of fear and disbelief. I believe, she said calmly, that Earth has some things to explain. Eye Speaker Morvith was the first to find his voice. This cannot be real, he said, and his crystalline form flickered with colors that show confusion and fear mixing together. The Varax cannot be tamed. They cannot be approached. They cannot be touched without dying. How is this child still alive? How is any of this possible? Dr. Vasquez stepped forward to stand beside Marcus, who was happily letting Shadow gnaw gently on his finger while he giggled at the tickling sensation. You asked earlier what makes humanity special, she said, and her voice carried clearly across the silent chamber. You looked at our bodies and saw no claws. You looked at our skin and saw no armor. You looked at our mouths and saw no fangs. And because you saw none of these things, you decided that humans were weak. You decided that we were helpless. You decided that we were nothing more than prey animals who had accidentally learned to use tools. She paused and let her gaze sweep across the assembled delegates. But you made a terrible mistake. A mistake that every predator species in this galaxy has made when they first encountered humanity. You assumed that because we did not evolve to be the strongest, we must have evolved to be food for those who did. Nebula'sEdge smiled, but there was something in that smile that made several delegates shift uncomfortably. Let me tell you about Earth, she continued. Our planet is what you would call a death world, though perhaps not as extreme as Varth Prime. The air has enough oxygen to be poisonous to many species. The star we orbit puts out enough radiation to cause mutations in unprotected life forms. Our world has been struck by asteroids, covered in ice, baked by volcanic eruptions, and poisoned by atmospheric changes. 99% of all species that have ever lived on Earth are now extinct. She gestured toward Marcus and Shadow. And yet humans survived all of this. Do you know how? Not through strength, not through speed, not through venom or armor or size. We survived because of two things that no other species in the galaxy seems to possess in the same combination. She held up one finger. First, we are persistence predators. On Earth, humans did not catch prey by being faster or stronger. We caught prey by following it. We would pick a target, a deer or a mammoth or any other creature, and we would simply follow it. Hour after hour, day after day, the prey would run and we would walk. The prey would hide and we would find it. The prey would collapse from exhaustion and we would still be coming. She held up a second finger. Second, and far more importantly, we have an almost uncontrollable urge to form bonds with other creatures. We look at things that should terrify us, things that could kill us with a single bite or swipe or sting, and our first thought is not, how do I escape, but I wonder if I can pet it. She pointed at Shadow, who was now batting playfully at Marcus's hair. Do you know what dogs were before humans befriended them? They were wolves. Pack hunters with jaws strong enough to crush bone. They could tear a human apart in seconds. And what did ancient humans do when they encountered these deadly predators? She laughed softly. They fed them. They sat near them. They let the wolves get used to their presence. Generation after generation, humans and wolves grew closer, until one day a wolf pup was born that did not fear humans at all. And that pup became the ancestor of every dog on Earth. Now wolves, or at least their descendants, sleep in our beds. They wear tiny sweaters. They become emotionally devastated if their human leaves the room for more than 5 minutes. Marcus nodded enthusiastically. I have a dog too. His name is Biscuit. He and Shadow are best friends. Sometimes they sleep in a big pile together on my bed, and there is no room for me. Dr. Vasquez continued. We did the same thing with cats, which are ambush predators that could blind a human with a single swipe. We did it with horses, animals large enough to crush us with one kick. We did it with birds of prey that could take out an eye. We have kept bears as companions and crocodiles, and venomous snakes and spiders and creatures that any sane species would run from at top speed. She looked directly at Executor Vryn. You said that Earth exists only because nothing worth conquering lives there. But I ask you to consider this. On Earth, every single apex predator has been either tamed by humans or driven to extinction by humans. Every single one. The great cats that once hunted us are now protected in reserves that we created. The wolves that stalked our ancestors now beg us for treats and belly rubs. There is nothing on our planet that we have not either befriended or destroyed. Vryn's sensory organs pulsed with what might have been fear. And now, Dr. Vasquez said, we have turned our attention to the Vorax. She let that statement hang in the air. This cub was found orphaned on the edge of Vorax territory 6 months ago. 17 different species declared that any rescue mission would be suicide. The Vorax do not abandon their young, so something terrible must have happened to the mother. And yet Earth sent a research team anyway. She smiled proudly. Within 2 months, our scientists had established basic trust with the cub. Within 4 months, she was playfully chasing researchers around the habitat. Within 6 months, Marcus here had become her best friend. He is not her handler. He is not her trainer. He is her companion. Her family. Marcus hugged Shadow tighter. She's my best friend in the whole universe. Well, tied with Biscuit. and maybe Tommy from school, but definitely top 3. Dr. Vasquez turned back to face the conclave. You mocked us for being soft. You laughed at us for being weak. But you failed to understand the most important thing about humanity. We do not conquer through strength. We conquer through patience. We conquer through kindness. We conquer through an absolutely insane willingness to love things that could kill us. She stepped forward, and nothing in this galaxy is immune to love. Not even the Varex. The chamber remained silent as every being processed what they had just heard. And slowly, very slowly, a new emotion began to replace the fear and shock in their eyes. It was terror, because they had just realized that humanity was not the helpless prey they had assumed. Humanity was something far, far worse. The vote was called 3 hours later, and it was unanimous. Not just for associate membership, which was what Earth had originally requested. The Galactic Conclave voted to grant humanity full integration into their organization, with all the rights and privileges and protections that came with that status. It was the fastest acceptance in the history of the Conclave, and it passed without a single voice of opposition. The delegates who had laughed at humanity that morning were now falling over themselves to express friendship and admiration. The Trekkie offered trade agreements. The Awarthians proposed scientific exchanges. Even the normally aloof archivists of Kilos Prime requested permission to send researchers to Earth to study human history. But Ambassador Rilith was the most changed of all. The serpentine creature slithered up to Dr. Vasquez after the vote. His earlier contempt completely replaced by something that looked almost like desperation. I must ask you something, he said, and his voice was quiet and serious. Your people have really done this before, with other dangerous species? This was not some kind of trick or special case. Dr. Vasquez nodded. Ambassador, we have been doing this for as long as our species has existed. We cannot seem to help ourselves. We see a dangerous creature, and something in our brain says, friend, instead of threat. It is honestly a little bit ridiculous. But how? Rilith demanded. The Varax are intelligent. They are cruel. They hunt for pleasure. How could a child possibly befriend one? Dr. Vasquez thought for a moment before answering. Let me ask you a question. Ambassador, when the Varax hunt your people, what do? Rilith made a hissing sound that indicated the answer was obvious. We run. We hide. We fight if there is no other choice, but we know that fighting usually means death. The Varax are too strong. Too fast. Too intelligent. Exactly, Dr. Vasquez said. You treat them as enemies, as threats, as monsters. And because you treat them that way, they respond to you that way. The relationship is defined by fear and violence on both sides. She looked over at Marcus, who was showing shadow to a group of curious young delegates who had overcome their fear enough to approach. The Varax cub was on her back, all 6 legs in the air, making happy sounds while the boy rubbed her belly. Humans do something different. Dr. Vasquez continued. When Marcus met Shadow, he did not run. He did not fight. He did not even try to capture or control her. He just sat nearby and offered food. He talked to her in a calm voice. He showed her that he was not a threat. And he waited for her to come to him. But that should have gotten him killed. Perhaps, but it did not. Because here is the thing that no one seems to understand about predators, Ambassador. They do not want to fight any more than prey animals. Fighting is dangerous. Fighting takes energy. Fighting can result in injuries that become infected and cause death. Given the choice, most predators would rather have easy meals and safe rest, and maybe some companionship. She smiled. Humans figured this out a long time ago. We realized that the best way to deal with a dangerous creature was not to fight it, but to convince it that we were not worth fighting. And then, once it stopped seeing us as threats or prey, we could start building a relationship based on something other than fear. Lilith processed this information. So you are saying that the Virax are cruel and violent because everyone treats them as cruel and violent? I am saying that every creature in the universe wants the same basic things. Dr. Vasquez replied, safety, food, rest, connection. The Virax evolved on a world where none of these things were easy to find. Of course, they became fierce. They had no choice. But that does not mean they cannot learn a different way to exist. She gestured toward Shadow again. That cub lost her mother. She was alone and scared in a hostile universe. And then a human child came along and offered her exactly what she needed most, which was patience and kindness and love. Is it really so surprising that she responded to that? Lilith was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question that was clearly bothering him the most. What happens now? What are your plans for the Virax? Dia Vasquez laughed. Plans, Ambassador? We do not have plans. We are just going to keep doing what we have always done. We will study them. We will learn about them. We will try to understand them. And eventually, probably, we will befriend them. And then? And then? Dr. Vasquez shrugged. In 100 years, some Virax will probably be living on Earth as companions. In 200 years, there will probably be Virax therapy animals helping humans with emotional problems. In 300 years, some human somewhere will probably breed a miniature version because they think it would be cute to have a pocket-sized apex predator. She saw the horror on Lilith's face and laughed again. I know. It sounds insane. But that is just what humans do. We look at the most terrifying things in the universe and ask, but can I pet it? And then we dedicate however long it takes to making sure the answer is yes. Across the chamber, Marcus had finished his demonstration. Shadow was now curled up in his arms again, purring contentedly while delegates from a dozen species stared at her with mixtures of fear and wonder. She really is friendly, Marcus called out to the room. You just have to give her a chance. Dr. Vasquez turned back to Lilith. Ambassador, you were right about one thing this morning. Humans are not apex predators. We do not have the strength or the speed or the natural weapons to claim that title. But we are something else. Something that the galaxy has never seen before. She smiled. And there was something both warm and slightly frightening in that smile. We are friendship predators. And nothing in this universe is immune to friendship. Not wolves, not cats, not bears or snakes or sharks, and not even the Virax. Given enough time and patience, we will befriend everything. It is simply what we do. The conclave ended that day with a new understanding of humanity. Earth was no longer the helpless backwater, the soft world, the species beneath notice. Earth was the world that looked at nightmares and said, I will call him Fluffy, and he will be mine. And that, every species agreed, was far more terrifying than any weapon. Because you could defend against weapons. You could not defend against a species that wanted to be your friend. And humanity, the galaxy now understood, wanted to be friends with everything, even the monsters. Especially the monsters. It was, they all agreed, absolutely horrifying. And also somehow strangely wonderful.